this is Jim Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, what would it take in the U.S. to provide school lunches like those in Japan and South Korea, posted by Ragnar OKX3, and they said, one thing that I see is that schools in Japan and South Korea source local foods as much as possible to provide the most nutritional meals for students, and because of this they also provide local farmers with business by purchasing directly from them. And yeah, personally I think that would be, if schools want to do that and taxpayers want to fund that, I think they should be able to. But if taxpayers don't want to fund that, I don't think they should be forced to do so. There's no such thing as a free lunch. That's important to remember when it comes to libertarianism. And that's always what they bring up whenever they say, well, we should be giving all the kids in schools free lunch. I think that'd be nice. But, ultimately, no lunch is free. All lunch requires labor to produce. And yeah, I personally, since a lot of schools are public, if taxpayers want to fund that, I think that'd be a relatively good thing to fund. Definitely better than the wars in the Middle East, or yeah. But it just goes to show you that I think we shouldn't have any public schools. All schools should be private, and I think if private schools could have their way and fund local farmers to provide for lunches for kids, that'd be a good way. But I don't think taxpayers should be forced to pay for student lunches if they don't want to, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have ICE stopping all cars in Albany, Georgia, looking for anyone that looks Latino or has an accent, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a cross post from the Eyes on ICE subreddit, and it looks like a TikTok video of just the situation they're describing. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for ICE. They're just another free letter authoritarian agency. But ultimately, as I always say, the government has the monopoly on the use of force just by doing whatever they want to. So if they want to pull over anyone who dissents at all, ultimately, they have the monopoly on the legal use of force to be able to do so. With that being said, it looks like this video doesn't have too much context in it, so it could be fake. But on Reddit, you also have to remember that, like most other social media, it's the narrative above all becomes more context all the time, and that's my thoughts there. Then we have, everyone should be armed, including those of opposing views, from posted by Groundbreaking Leg 11, and that's cross-post from the Libertarian LGBTQ subreddit, and it says, armed minorities are harder to oppress, and it's pictures of a black person with a gun, looks like a Korean with a gun, trans person with a gun, and yeah, I definitely American with a gun. I definitely think, I would agree with that. Personally, I think everyone who wants to bear arms should be able to bear arms. It's a constitutional right, and yeah, ultimately everyone has the right to whatever weapons and resources they can get their hands on. So ultimately, I do think, everyone should be able to justify using whatever weapons they want to, since, ultimately, the state isn't responsible for your self-defense, despite what some people might think, because the state can turn around and use its lethal force against you at any second for any reason it feels like. And yeah, that's why you need to provide for your own self-defense rather than have the state rely on the state for it. Then we have, officials concede they don't know the fate of Iran's uranium stockpile, and that's an archive link to a story from the New York Times, posted by Dr. 07, and yeah, it's just kind of another Iraq WMDs moment, I think. They're just pushing that Iran is about to develop these nuclear weapons, when in reality they're probably not nearly as close as they think they are. And yeah, I personally don't think we should have been bombing Iran, but ultimately, the U.S. is always bombing brown people in the Middle East, pretty much, just because they're doing it in other countries that normally don't do it in, doesn't really make it too much of a difference in my perspective, and that's my thoughts there. And then we have, new GOP programming is downloading, new endless Middle East warfare regime change in Iran by order of the God King, posted, and that's from Warriors.com. Trump asked why there would not be regime change in Iran, and that's posted by CH Warlocks. And yeah, personally, I don't think the U.S. should be enforcing regime change anywhere. Personally, I don't really care for the Iranian regime in charge currently, but it's the Iranian people's job to control their own destiny, not that of the U.S. And that's my thoughts there. Then we have Trump's taxpayer-funded faith office, posted by CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the Religious Fruit Creek subreddit. Members of Trump's taxpayer-funded faith office pray outside the West Wing. And yeah, personally, it looks kind of like there. I don't think. I think we need the separation of church and state. I don't think there should be a faith office. But with that being said, if Reddit had control, if the woke Redditors had control of the government, that we would not just not have a faith office, we'd have Christianity be illegal, and I don't think that's the libertarian option either. The libertarian option is the separation of church and state, and increasingly that's kind of eroded over the past century with "In God We Trust" being the national motto. I don't think that should probably be the national motto. I know if a woke Reddit atheist ever took over, it would be "There is no God." That would be the national motto. And personally, I just think we just gotta separate the church and the state. If the church wants to do something, that's fine. If the state wants to do something, that's fine. But, I don't think they should be mixing with each other. And, yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Weird Don't the Iranians Know That's the Trump administration called No Tag Backs, posted by Ragnar OKXD, and that's cross-posted from the Weird Twitter account subreddit, and that's a tweet from Midas Touch. Breaking Iranian retaliation underway. Here's what we know so far. Iran has launched Operation Gold Tidings of Victory, targeting U.S. forces. At least 6 missiles fired at U.S. bases in Qatar. Explosions heard over Doha, possibly intercepted. U.S. jets scrambling over Saudi Arabia. More missiles reportedly fired at U.S. bases in Iraq. Alarms going off at U.S. armed bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. All U.S. bases in the region may be at risk. Trump is back. Situation room with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the Joint Chiefs. And yeah, personally, that's why I think you probably shouldn't have bombed Iran, because, they could always bomb you back. But ultimately, I think, it will fizzle out probably, because I think the U.S. the Qatar, I think, intercepted the missiles for the U.S. air base, so that's nice. And yeah, personally, I think Iran is kind of they might try shooting back, but I don't know if they'll be that successful on it. With that being said, that doesn't justify the U.S.'s shots either. No one should be firing missiles at anyone. That's the libertarian perspective. Libertarian perspective is, everyone does what they want, and no one, as long as they're not hurting anyone else, we shouldn't be aggressing on anyone else by firing missiles at them. And we have Republicans' life-threatening pregnancy collided with Florida's abortion politics, and that's an archive link to Wall Street Journal, and that's posted by Dr. 07. And yeah, personally, I think, if the Republican House member wanted to get an abortion, if she should be able to, I think, everyone should be able to get an abortion wherever they want. She would say that it's not an abortion technically, though, since it was only an ectopic pregnancy, but some people consider that an abortion. Ultimately justify whatever you want to. I'm personally not the biggest fan of abortion. I consider myself pro-choice, but it's definitely, I like the safe, legal, rare rhetoric from the Bill Clinton era rather than the LOL, I just got an abortion while watching my favorite Twitch streamer rhetoric we have now. And yeah, if you want to celebrate abortion and think it's the greatest thing ever, that's on you. But personally, I do think it should be seen as a medical and bodily autonomy issue rather than a moral issue where you think it's either the worst thing ever or the greatest thing ever. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Republicans and War in the Middle East from Mundane Image 13. That's a Blue Sky post from James Shields. It is 1990. I'm 5 years old. The U.S. is bombing the Middle East. The Republican is president. It's 2003. I'm 17 years old. The U.S. is bombing the Middle East. The Republican is president. It's 2025. I'm 40 years old. The U.S. is bombing the Middle East. The Republican is president. And they added, this time shitpost can make a point. What is about Republicans that seem to love war? I'm sure there have been some Democrats started wars, but I don't think that was in my lifetime. And what really gets me is that they're using the same excuse every time, and fairly sure that this is just causing Middle Eastern countries to try harder for nukes, because this would cause us to treat them more fairly. And I agree with that. Personally, Reddit, they'll only show on the Republicans, but Democrats, they'll bomb the Middle East as well. It just goes to show you that, it doesn't really matter who you vote for. You always end up pretty much with John McCain, a war hawk who will try and bomb the Middle East as much as possible. And yeah, it doesn't really matter who's in charge. That they'll just bomb the Middle East and people will cope with it. And So the next president's elected, and they'll probably bomb the Middle East too. And yeah, personally, I don't think the U.S. should be doing foreign intervention at all. But ultimately, since the state has the legal monopoly of force, it can justify whatever it want to. If a non-state actor like myself bombed the Middle East for decades on end, unrelentingly, I'd be an international war criminal. But the state does it, and it's completely fine. It's pretty much just any other Tuesday. And that just goes to show you how, it's pirates and emperors. When a pirate does something, it's a crime, but when an emperor does something, it's the law. And that's just something that I don't particularly care for. We need to hold the state accountable for its violence and authoritarianism, just like we hold individuals accountable if they force their violence and authoritarianism on us as well. Then we have infighting happening on r/Trump over Iran bombing for U.S. bases, posted by Ragnar OKXP, and that's cross-posted from the Leopards Ate My Face subreddit. And that looks like, let's see, yeah, it looks like the post was removed, so I can't really see it. But yeah, infighting is kind of, I would say, more prominent than outfighting these days. Everyone always has problems with their own side rather than the other side. And yeah, personally, if you want to do infighting, that's fine. I definitely do think Trump needs to be held accountable because he promised no new wars, and now he's just reneging on that promise, and that's not something that I particularly care for. But with that being said, I don't think it would have been too different under Kamala. Kamala would probably bomb Iran as well, and then Ray would be like, "You go, girl boss, Kamala. You need to hold Iran accountable for their anti-LGBTQ regime." And Reddit would just be eating it all up if it was Kamala doing the bombing. But since the Orange Man doing it, it's the worst thing ever. And that just goes to show you, people don't have values; they only have teams, pretty much. And outside of the occasional infighting, people will just do whatever their team says. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. And then we look see we have a new post. What if there was no World War One? IF election sim link below, posted by NeckOptimal5890, and that's crosswords from the Imaginary Election subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't think that's at all realistic. I think World War One's kind of inevitable. I think all wars are kind of inevitable to some extent, but World War One definitely strikes me as one of the ones that was kind of really inevitable because all the European powers were really had all the entangling alliances and were really suspicious of each other. So yeah, personally, I would like if a world of World War One didn't break out, but ultimately, I think it's kind of one of the more inevitable wars of history. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. And I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.